This is a Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV, a premium flagship smartphone released in 2022 featuring a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 and 12GB of RAM. Now this was released by Sony, which means it has a couple of their very interesting features like headphone jack and very easily removable micro SD slot. You can just kind of pop it out. And today we're going to be doing a deep dive into this phone and seeing how good is it even now in 2026, 4 years after it was released. Having a look at the exterior of the phone, as at the bottom we have our removable SIM tray, which you can just pop out like this, as I showed at the beginning. USB-C port, supporting USB 3.2, supporting USB 3.25 gigabit. A dedicated camera shutter button, which is a 2-click jobby, so you click in once, go a bit further, like on DSLRs, or I think this tries to mimic a real Sony camera, and I think it does do it quite well, especially the software, but we'll have a look at that later. The fingerprint sensing power button, which does work really well. As soon as you tap it, it just logs you in. Every phone should have these, especially Apple. The volume rocker, nothing interesting there. At the top we have a headphone jack. Personally I prefer it at the bottom, but it doesn't really matter, at least it has one. Antenna band, and nothing else interesting on this side. Flipping over to the back, we have a really nice sort of flush matte finish, like on the S22 or other newer phones. Camera bump, obviously, which is quite flat, although it does have a little bit of table wobble, but not too bad. Also have the world's most useless torch and the cameras. Going around to the front, the first thing you might notice is there's no hole punch for the camera. The camera's actually built in up here into the bezel, which I quite like. So on many modern phones, it really quite bugs me how there's a big notch at the top on iPhones or stupid hole punch camera. Getting started, the first thing you notice when you pick up this phone is the screen, and it is amazing. Unlike most other phones, it is a whopping 4K, sort of, and 120Hz. Unfortunately, mine has minor burn-in, which all of these Xperia 1 Mark IV seem to suffer from, but it's quite minor. The entire screen is slightly pink, but it's not that noticeable in day-to-day life. The next thing you notice when you pick this up is just how responsive and snappy it feels. Like, even compared to some of my better phones, like a OnePlus 12, everything just feels so responsive, like opening apps or whatever, it's just so fast. And the 120Hz really helps it feel good. As you should probably assume, this screen isn't OLED, and because of that, the blacks are perfect. When you're playing some media that has a little black in it, you'll think the screen is off. It really does look very good. Now, the other interesting thing about this screen is it's a weird 21:9 aspect ratio, which for some things, like maybe a game like Hill Climb Racing, is quite nice, but for other things, it's really not. For instance, if you want to go watch some YouTube Brain or whatever, the aspect ratio doesn't really work very well. As you can see, the Brain Rot's got massive bars at the bottom and top, because it's just not really taking up enough of the phone screen. But for day-to-day and productivity especially, the 21:9 aspect ratio is really quite nice. So if you want to open up a Google Doc or something with a lot of text, there's plenty of vertical room for it to fit in. As I mentioned earlier, this phone has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, so same as the Samsung S22 Ultra or OnePlus 10, and a lot of other flagship phones at that time. This model only has 12GB RAM, but you can get one up to 16GB RAM, and obviously it's the fastest and whatever. Now, this processor allows it to do some pretty impressive things, like record video in either the Video Pro app or the Pro Video app at up to 120fps at 4K, and do it properly. Unlike my Sony Xperia 5 Mark II, which doesn't do the job very well. You lose audio and stuff when you try and do a high bitrate, but this does it really quite well. Now, unfortunately for the cameras, they're only 12 megapixel each, and ultra-wide or 0.7x main, and another interesting feature is the telephoto, as it has an adjustable zoom, like the Xiaomi 17, which is only like 4 years later after this. This allows this camera to zoom anywhere from 3.5x to 5.2x, which sounds really impressive on paper, but in reality is rather useless. You'd be just fine with a normal 3x lens. But one way or another, it's a nice cool feature. Now, I've been using this phone for a couple of days now. There's a few things I've really noticed. First of all is the screen. It's okay at anti-glare. It's better than my OnePlus 12, surprisingly, but Samsung, it's still got some work to do, catch up with Samsung. Also, the battery life on this thing is a bit of a surprise. The battery itself is 5000 mAh, which is pretty normal by today's standards, but it does last quite well. Also, this phone does support wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. Now this is the only phone I've ever found that allows you to do reverse wireless charging. You just grab it on this phone. Wow, you also actually charge the Sony Xperia. All of my other phones, like the OnePlus 12, it's charging now, or even like Samsung S21 Ultra, you can't actually do this. The phone just drains battery. If you try and plug the charger in, it'll just say, "Oh, I can't charge," or whatever stupid error. Which is really nice, because if you're travelling or whatever and you just want to throw some earbuds on the back of the phone, it's quite helpful. Because you can just have the phone plugged in overnight and have it charge up all your stuff. Especially if you forgot the extra USB-C cables or whatever. Now, as this is a Sony phone, the software build is quite minimal. It has obviously Sony's custom apps, Game Enhancer, which is useless, the usual Google suite, and some other random junk I've installed, like device info or whatever. As you can also see, with basically no apps open, it's using not very much RAM, which is nice. As well as feeling rather snappy, the whole OS is sort of clean layout. It really reminds me of like a Google Pixel with this and the settings app and button in weird places and all sorts of things like that. It seems like they really haven't done much to try and customise the operating system on here. But that's okay, I don't mind clean Android. Unfortunately though, it doesn't have a decent photo app and it comes shipped with Google Photos, which is just rubbish. Yeah, overall I do quite like the software on it. The whole UI is quite clean and looks good. Much like, well, because it's Sony Xperia 1, it is a premium smartphone supporting features like USB 3, which only seems to appear on premium smartphones, or well, Google Pixels. Wi-Fi 6E, which was the latest for its generation, even though it seems to have an issue where it can't actually connect to 6 GHz Wi-Fi, even though it technically supports it. 5G, obviously, the latest Bluetooth, NFC, as you can see on the back, and a few other nifty little features like a depth of field sensor and some other random sensors around the back. Now, unfortunately, the general haptics on this phone are a bit poor compared to like a OnePlus or a Samsung phone, especially if you go in an app which has vibrations like Dune or whatever. You're going to find yourself very disappointed as they feel like complete crap. This isn't a huge issue though, as if you go into settings you can just turn vibrations off for stuff. Overall, the settings on this phone seems to be quite well implemented. There's a lot of things you can change or mess with to get the phone working how you want it to. Another nice thing about all Sony phones is you can actually set the phone up without connecting it to a Gmail account. So this phone is actually Gmail-less at the moment, except for the Play Store obviously. But you don't need a Gmail for setting up Sony phones, which I do really appreciate, especially in the age of everything trying to track you and whatever. Now, onto the camera. First things first, if you just hold down the shutter button, it will automatically open up the Photography Pro app in the basic mode. Now the camera shutter button has the first click in for focus and then the final click in for take the photo. Now, as you can see at the bottom, like every phone app, you have your zoom angles, and if you want to use the fancy dynamic zoom thing, you just sort of zoom in. If we grab a thing to take a picture of, like this rather small banana thing, that doesn't fit. Now if we want to take our picture, we can simply just press the button or press the camera button, both work. The zoom is nice and smooth, especially when you get to the whole 3.5 to 5.2x. It seems quite responsive and relatively fast. Past that, it just goes into digital zoom. Now, also in the photography app, you have the basic mode, which is sort of like your normal camera phone app. Then you have Auto, P, S, M, MR. Now, these are designed to mirror the photo settings you'll find on a Sony A7 camera, like the one this is being filmed on. So Auto is just automatic mode, but you get some extra fancy settings. Program Auto is just a bit more control over stuff. Shutter speed, you can set a shutter yourself. Manual, set everything yourself, and that's just really cool. But really basic works quite well on here. You can go into menu, and that's the easy. And the app does have all the basic features, like you can change your aspect ratio, useless flash on or off, shooting mode, so you can set it into like a burst mode. Also the volume buttons, like on many phones, do zoom, because it has dedicated shutter button, they don't need to do take photo. You also have it tries to do a fake sort of bokeh effect, or on other phones it'd be called portrait mode or whatever, but this works absolutely terribly. And you also have the white balance and stuff, sort of. If we press this button here, we can put it into the sort of basic video mode, which is just your day-to-day video, which does support doing both ways properly, has autofocus setting, useless torch again. You can quite easily set it to HDR in here, which is nice, although the HDR isn't very impressive on here. But if you go into like auto mode or whatever, any other things, then you immediately lose all the video features. But this isn't how Sony intended you to record video on this phone. They want you to use one of their two dedicated video apps, either Video Pro or Cinema Pro. Cinema Pro has been around forever on Sony phones, or even on like my Xperia 5 Mark II, or I think even older ones. But Video Pro, I haven't seen on any other models, mainly because I don't own them. Now this app is what I think you're supposed to use for most of your video, and I really quite like it. It has this stupid fake zoom thing. You got your easy focus control. Then if you go into menu, you can select what lens you want, so ultra wide, 24mm, or the fancy zoomy thing. And then you've got obviously your HDR or SDR setting. SDR looks fine on here. Then video format, you can do 720p, 1080 or 4K. Let's leave it on 4K. And the FPS count, where you can set even up to 120 on even 4K. Unfortunately, if you crank FPS on 4K though, you can't have stabilization on. I don't know what slow motion does. I can't get it to actually do anything. I think it's just useless. And there's also a second menu for things like white balance, shutter speed, volume, autofocus, whatever that is. And overall, everything in this app is implemented quite well. Now, the issue with this is, though, like every phone that uses a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, it overheats terribly. Even if you just leave it on something sensible, like a 1080p 60 for an hour or so, it will overheat and stop recording, which is very not convenient. But, oh well. If you don't want overheating or all the nice features, you can use Cinema Pro app if you want to, for whatever reason. This is basically just hard mode for this phone, and you can set the resolution, but you have to create a new project if you want to change the resolution. This does support 2K or 4K, no 1080p here though, not for you. And you also set your FPS all the way up to 120. So you can actually do 2K 120 as well, but like, great, still overheats. Then you can also apply a stupid look if you want to make your thing look like crap, or you can set the lens as usual, and everything in here is just harder to use, and the app's just generally garbage. If you want to do something like stabilization, you have to go away in here to do it, and it's just poorly designed. I don't know why they didn't remake this. They just decided to dump it and make Video Pro, which is actually good, but whatever. And then obviously to actually view your photos, it comes with Google Photos, where the different video apps are sort of implemented well. It's yeah, a bit all over the place. Now we're going to go on to how the camera actually looks and do some general just camera tests outside. Now we're going to do some actual camera tests, starting off using the Photography Pro app on basic mode. Things work fine. You can take a picture, it comes out looking alright if it's nice and bright outside. Camera does a decent job, has auto HDR, the zooming's nice and smooth. Moving on to the auto mode, which is a bit closer to a real Sony camera, and not much changes really, except for a bit of a different UI, which, to be honest, I think I prefer the basic mode. Obviously you have modes like shutter speed, manual, whatever. Now let's have a look at some of the photos I've taken. Now, much like a real DSLR, most of the photos you take on this are going to look out crap, but sometimes you get a nice one. Now at night things are a bit different. Sony has a bulb exposure mode, where you can take exposure all the way up to 30 seconds apparently, but I don't think the sensor is actually capable of doing this. That seems a bit ridiculous for a phone sensor. Now these are looking alright, but if we bring up an image, say I took on my OnePlus 12, all of a sudden the Sony looks like complete crap in comparison. I don't know what magic OnePlus is doing behind the scenes to make their night shots look so good. I don't even think they're doing a Samsung and making it all up, because I can see some of these stars and stuff that come up in the photo with my bare eyes. But either way, it completely blows away the competition. Comparing it with something a bit closer like an S21 Ultra, things look a bit more equal. Now on to using the Video Pro app. As you can see, I've got my FPS set to 120 and 4K. Now let's go for a walk, and as you can see, the camera does an alright job. I have HDR enabled and things look quite balanced. Nothing seems over or underexposed in this sort of like just looking at things. And moving around looks okay. Unfortunately, these FPSs I can't have stabilisation on, so things can seem a bit wobbly. The lens does suffer from sun glare a little bit, and sometimes it's a bit slow to respond and things might get overexposed. But overall, it does an alright job. Now I have both phones in the car window recording at 1080p 30, and you can see it on side by side to the screen, and wow, is the S21 Ultra so much sharper on the ultra wide lens than the Sony Xperia. This is quite disappointing from Sony, as the image is generally a lot worse and a lot more sort of smushed together, whereas the Samsung does a much better job at it. Despite the Samsung S21 Ultra being like a year older. Now on to what I like to call the candle test, which is basically just... This is a really good test because the phone has to quickly adjust its exposure to match the flame. For this test I have the camera set to manual focus and the resolution is 1080p 30. First off, we're going to be trying out the Sony Xperia's just photo prep on the video setting in the basic mode. As you can see, the candle is out of focus because it doesn't support manual focus, and there's quite a lot of light bleed. Everything's nothing's very sharp, everything's quite grainy, and when the match lights, everything's quite overexposed. But once it's fixed the exposure, it does look pretty nice. Now onto the Video Pro app, where everything is really weird and purpley grainy for some reason in the dark. When the match lights though, everything seems to struggle a bit again. Nothing looks very good on this mode. This mode seems to really struggle with the dark. Now onto Cinema Pro. This by far looks the most cinematic, as before it lights it's basically pitch black, and once it does it has a really quite nice pretty flame. Now, if you want really cinematic, you can record in Cinema Pro at 120 FPS and slow it down. Here I've slowed it down by a factor of 4 down to 30 FPS, where things are really quite nice and cinematic and slow. I quite like this effect, I think it looks quite good.